Okay. It has been a minute since I've been on here. And so I am super excited for this one. We are talking today about how you need to be more selfish. Now, the reason we're getting into this is because I've had a lot of conversations over the last little while where this has become really obvious to me. And it was listening to Tim Grover's audiobook that really reinforced this point with me. So I'm really excited to get into this one. But yeah, being more selfish. And that seems like a negative thing. But we're going to talk in the podcast today about why that is not a negative thing. As you tune in, Instagram, make sure you stick around after the podcast. We're going to be going for about 15 minutes, and then I'm going to stay and do a little bit of Q&A. So make sure you're sticking around. If you've got any questions, drop them in the chat as we go, and we'll get to them as the show wraps up. So apparently I got a little bit of a cough going. Hopefully that goes away. But why you need to be more selfish, and we are going to get going in 3, 2, 1. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Elite Development Podcast, the #1 show for athletes looking to gain an edge on their opponents and build their dream careers in sport. I'm your host, Kenny Dusseault, and today we're talking about why you need to be more selfish. Now, why we're bringing this one to you, why I wanted to do a podcast on this was because I was listening to Tim Grover's audiobook, Winning, yesterday, and he was talking about how the term selfish has become a negative thing, but it's actually a really important thing. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how he framed that in his book and why that hit home for me so hard, and then hopefully that hits home for you as well. So he talked about how if like the term selfish itself gets deemed as a negative thing, you don't want to be selfish. You don't want to, have people think that you're selfish. But then when people take time for themselves, nobody sees a problem with that. Like if somebody says, yeah, I just need a little bit of me time this weekend, everybody's like, yeah, that makes sense. You do a lot during your week, and so you got to have a little me time. That makes sense. He's like, why is that different than someone saying, I'm going to spend my time, hustling towards these goals and dreams that I have for my life? It's not. But when somebody frames it as, I need a little me time or something like that, people view it as normal. When somebody frames, oh, I meditate every morning, people consider that really healthy. Well, that's taking time for you to take care of self, which by the technical definition would be selfish. And he talked about one of the most selfish moments of his life, which ended up helping him become who he is, which I thought was super, super powerful and I wanted to talk about. He said that he came from a family where basically he had 2 career options according to his parents. Those 2 career options were become a doctor or become a doctor. And so when he came to his parents and he said, hey, I want to train professional athletes, they thought that was crazy. And so then he just told them, this is what he wanted to do, but because he knew they wanted him to be a doctor, he would apply to medical school anyway. And he said he applied to medical school hoping and praying that he wouldn't get in. And he got in. And that's when he had to have one of the most selfish conversations of his life, which was, Mom, Dad, I'm not going to go to medical school. I'm not going to be a doctor. I'm going to pursue this dream of training professional athletes. And most people look at that and they would say, well, yeah, he's following his passion. He's following his dream. That's what you should do. But that is the type of thing that a lot of people consider selfish. That is putting yourself first. And this is what we need to learn to do more effectively. Because, guys, if you want to reach the highest level in your sport, if you want to reach the highest level at anything you do, it requires a lot of saying no. And it requires a lot of putting yourself first. It requires a lot of making sacrifices. It requires a lot of letting go of old friendships or letting go of, old relationships that don't serve you anymore. It requires being selfish, winning at the highest level, succeeding at the highest level, building your dream career, which is what we're all about here, requires being selfish. Now, again, there are a lot of very different ways that you can go about defining that term and defining what that actually means. there's a big difference between a parent deciding that, they don't want to show up at their kids events or something like that just because, they're tired or whatever. Okay, that's probably a moment where being selfish is bad, and you could probably put that aside and go be there for your kid. Now, there's a difference between that and someone saying that I'm going to concentrate and spend time working on building my dream career and working on actually putting myself first to achieve the goals I have for my life instead of follow someone else's vision for your life. Now, something like that, by the same definition, is selfish, but something like that is where being selfish is important. And that's something that, even looking back at my own life, why that story from Tim Grover hit so hard was because that was me when I was, 19 or 20 years old. I had that conversation with my parents too, because they wanted me to follow a little bit of a safer path going into being a teacher or something like that. And in the beginning of university, that's what I did. I started into languages, which is going to lead me to education, which was going to lead me to become a teacher. Then I was about 2 months into that, not going to class, not having any desire to continue that degree, not having any desire to be a teacher or anything like that. And I kept just thinking, why am I going to school for 4 years to get a degree that I don't want, to have to go get a master's degree that I don't want, to hopefully maybe try to find a job that I don't want? It doesn't make any sense. But I knew that was something that, my parents wanted in any of our discussions or anything like that. Everything they said was, find a job, be able to find a salary. Oh, they need male teachers. So you can get a job doing that. And so when I had the conversation with them that, no, I'm following this dream. I want to train professional athletes. I want to be a strength and conditioning coach. There was a lot of tension there. And when I say this as well, I want to really reinforce that there wasn't tension there because my parents are bad people. There wasn't tension there because my parents don't love me. There was tension there because they wanted what was best for me and they didn't understand what I was pursuing. But it was important to me to be selfish and actually pursue the dream that I have for my career. And because that would have been when I was 19 or 20, so that would have been 10, 11 years ago. And now 11 years later, I make a great living. I drive a car that I love. I own a gym, which is something that I've wanted since I was 13 years old. And I train professional athletes around the world, including guys that I just signed up, one in the UFC and one that's making his one championship debut in December. Now, if I had been selfless and followed the path that they thought was best for me, who the hell knows where I would be right now? And guys, when I say that too, there's no bragging here. I don't feel like I've even started. I pop out of bed at 4:00 in the morning every single day because I am fucking excited to get to my day. But I'm excited to get to my day because for 10 fucking years, I've been selfish and I've put myself first. I've lost a lot of friendships in that time. I've lost relationships in that time. But I've known that if those friends and if those relationships and if those people don't understand and don't want to support me being who I am, then they're not people that I need in my life long term anyway. And this is what I really want to reinforce with you guys. If you have a dream of being a professional athlete, you need to pursue it. If you have a dream of being a professional athlete, you need to pursue it. You need to put the time in. You need to put the work in. You need to learn to say no to your friends. You need to learn to say no to family, to other commitments. You need to learn to put yourself first. Because even just thinking back on if I had pursued the languages degree and gone and been a teacher, thinking about that life compared to what I'm doing now is it almost makes me sad to think about the fact that there are people out there who were in that same position. They had something that they wanted to do, something want to go all in on, but their parents or their friends or whoever told them that, that wasn't realistic, so you should just go do this instead. And they didn't make the jump. So now they're living a life that they're unhappy with, probably not doing as well financially as they could have, and probably just day to day living a very miserable, unhappy life because they weren't willing to take the jump. They weren't willing to be selfish. They weren't willing to put their own needs, their own values, their own thoughts above the thoughts and the needs and the values of other people. And this is something that I'm just desperate to change for people, because like, if you knew what the feeling was like of waking up every day excited to get to what you do, to get to do what you do. If you knew the feeling of waking up every day just pumped for your day, there's no feeling like it. But the other side of this, and what I really want to make sure I reinforce within this show too, is guys, if you're going to make that selfish decision, if you're going to drop out of the degree, if you're going to, go all in your career, if you're going to do all these things that I hope you decide to do, you've got to understand it's a fucking grind. It is a fucking grind. Over the last 10 years since I made that decision, I moved 12 times in 7 years. I moved across the country to take a job that paid nothing because it was in my field. So I was going to be able to learn from the people around me that were actually succeeding in my field. Right now, I own my gym and I work about an average of 12 to 15 hours a day, 6 days a week. And through the last 5 years, 6 years living in Calgary as well, I spent the first 2 years in Calgary living in an apartment with no heat. And the apartment that I was living in was in the basement of a small house, and the people who lived upstairs were hoarders. So one of my walls was actually a curtain, and on the other side of my curtain was basically floor to ceiling packed with shit because the people upstairs were hoarders. And in that apartment as well, again, I had no heat, and my kitchen was just a hot plate on a counter. But I lived there for 9 months because I couldn't afford anything else. It was $500 a month, everything included, and it was close to the gym. I made less than $1,000 a month for a full year while I was getting my feet under me at that gym, and budgeted my groceries down to $37 a week, spent no money on anything leisure or anything like that. But through all that time, there was never a second thought. That's enough to break most people. That's enough to make a lot of people go, it's not worth it. Because that's hard when you're seeing your friends making, $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year, living in a nice apartment, driving a nice car, doing all that, and you're making dirt, working 15 hours a day. It's hard to go through that. But you've got to understand that those moments, like that low point where you're like, man, what am I doing? Why am I putting myself through this? Those are the moments that allow you to rise above. Continuing to go through the things that are going to break most people are the moments that allow you to rise above. And if you actually rise above, you actually continue to push through those moments. You actually continue to put yourself first when your friends are telling you to quit, when your family's telling you to quit, when everyone around you is telling you this is the wrong decision. If you know you are continuing to be willing to put the work in that is required, you're going to get out of it. You're going to get out of it, and you're going to continue to move forward. Now, the tough part with this, guys, and the tough part with this mentality is that nothing's guaranteed. You can do all the right things for a long time, and maybe you just don't have what it takes. But the way that I look at that and why I believe you should still go for it anyway is because if you have a dream of being a professional athlete, you have a dream of doing something great with your life, whatever it might be, if you selfishly put yourself first and you actually go all in, you actually invest the money, invest the time, invest in yourself to make that dream a reality, then regardless of the outcome, you can look back and you can confidently say, I tried, and you can confidently say, I gave it everything I had. Because that's the mentality I went into this career with. I knew that there were a lot of people around me that didn't think it was going to work out. I knew there were a lot of people around me that thought it was crazy, thought it was stupid, thought that this was just a pipe dream that was never going to happen. So I set a limit for myself. I said, if by the time I'm 30, I'm still like barely surviving, then I'm going to go find plan B. And now we're 30 years old, and holy, are we way more than just barely surviving. And that is the thing. If you set that limit, you've got to understand as well, guys, like at 30 years old, I feel better than I did when I was 20. Like, if I was to restart now, which obviously I'm not doing that because I'm not in a position where I have to, but if I was to restart now, I'm not behind. There are a lot of people that restart 2, 3, 4, 5 times. And people are so worried about being behind. They're so worried about the image of, like, what their life looks like, without realizing that it's like, if you're willing to be in the fucking dirt, if you're willing to grind it out at, the bottom, then that's what's going to allow you to rise above. But if you're not willing to spend time down here, if you're not willing to spend time at the bottom, don't ever expect to make it to the top. So guys, that is why being selfish is important. That is why we've got to change the narrative around what being selfish means. And I hope you learned something. I hope you got something out of it. But for now, that is the podcast for today. That is it. That is all. I appreciate you all. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. And I will catch you on the next episode.